Before we move on to the final question, can I just make sure, is everybody hearing this okay? Nobody has any problems with their sound? It's just that Lorna's highlighted that she's been having problems. Everybody else okay? Okay, great. Okay, thanks. Final question was, what can I do if a worker doesn't want to return to work at the end of their furlough period? So I think this is for you, Nick.
Okay, so a worker who doesn't want to return to work after their furlough period, I suppose first of all it's important to realise that as an employer you have an implied duty to every worker to care for their health and safety at work. You, in the context of COVID-19, you can do this and you can show that you're doing this in a number of ways. Actually, Select have recently published and will shortly be updating a Select like returning to work template letter, which is set out in such a way that you can highlight the things that you're doing in your workplace in order to make that workplace or in order to mitigate the risk within that workplace with regards to COVID-19. And there are examples that you can, delete as appropriate or pick and choose or add in your own things that you're going to be doing in order to try and safeguard the health and safety of your workers. The letter also has a questionnaire in it through which you can gather information from your workforce and assess the risk, and so that you can make a full risk assessment and then maybe also allocate resources appropriately in order to best protect your workers. I suppose coming to the sort of employment law side of it, Section 44 of the Employment Rights Act 1996 stipulates that if a worker is of the opinion, and it's the worker's opinion that counts here, that their employer has either deliberately or carelessly failed to provide adequate protection for them in the workplace for their health and safety, they would be entitled to withdraw their labour on full pay until the appropriate protections are in place. So it's important to tread carefully here. You should obviously be meeting, online, virtually, on the phone, whatever, with each of your workers to speak to them about the protections that you are putting in place and the measures that you're taking to protect their health and safety, as well as providing confirmation of that in a letter. You could be using what will be produced in terms of the toolbox talks to help your employees become aware of the new protocols and procedures that should be followed in the workplace, and to assuage any fears about unnecessary risk or risk that hasn't been thought about. Above all, listen to your workers. Ask them what they're specific. If somebody is saying, I'm not wanting to come back because I am scared for my safety, you need to listen to what it is that is specifically they're thinking about. For example, someone may say, I don't drive, and to get to work, I'll need to get on a bus with loads of other people who may or may not be sick. So what can be done about that? And there may be something that you can do. There may be ways for you to mitigate that risk for them. Things that are included in the letter could be things like, staggering start times, operating different protocols within the workplace in terms of physical distancing. So even in the office, for example, moving desks, simple things like that could be something that could assuage fears and give someone the confidence to come back. If they still refuse, you need to kind of remember that the furlough scheme and them being off work because they're on the furlough scheme, that is intended to provide workers with at least part of an income while work for their employer is not possible or is not able to be undertaken. employers A, aren't obliged to partake in the scheme at all, and B, workers can't assume that by saying they won't return to work means that they will stay on furlough. So they may think, well, I'm not going to return to work, but then if the employer decides to no longer participate in the furlough scheme, then that not returning to work will have to fall into another category if that is going to be agreed between the parties. So it could be, for example, I understand that you don't want to return to work. Would you like to take holiday? Would you like to take unpaid leave? Would you like to take some other category of leave that we may offer? But I think that definitely a conversation around that, just explaining we're not using the furlough scheme anymore. It's not an option if that is what your company has decided. If you feel that the employee's refusal to return is vexatious, let's say, then you might wish to, as an absolute last resort, consider exploring your company's disciplinary procedure. If you feel that, for example, if they're saying, I don't want to return to work because I don't want to be exposed, etc., but you know, or you believe that you know that they are out and about in all other contexts, and this is something that you think is a non sequitur and you want to address. However, please contact Select's EA team for advice if you do want to think about disciplinary. In the current climate, it's very, very important that any disciplinary action or any other, statutory procedures such as those are followed to the letter. It's very important that these things are done with all the I's dotted and T's crossed. So there, long-winded from me as well. Sorry. Any questions related to that?
Okay, thanks, Nick. That was the last question. Sorry, Bob.
I was just going to say, Nick, thanks for confirming that I'm long-winded.
No, so that was the last question that I had today. However, Alan, you've just posted one in the chat saying, is it realistic to think that we will be able to start back to work next Thursday, or is this just going to be for phases 0 and 1 and phase 2 going to be later?
I'm happy to take that, Sandra.
Okay.
Okay, so the situation is, as per the announcement, was that the phases 0 to 1 would be undertaken from the end of next week, and that, if you haven't seen already, is about preparation of sites, discussions with operatives, that type of thing, with the expectation that if that all goes well, then phase 2, which would effectively be the return to work, albeit on the conditions in relation to social physical distancing, and minimise numbers around certain sizes of sites, would begin thereafter, and then would be closely monitored. So I think it's a step phase, that phase 0 to 1, the preparation starting, and then the actual physical work itself, I think, beginning in the middle of June on sites especially. What's not clear yet is, from a domestic perspective, because obviously normally your preparation would include, going to a customer's property, giving them a quote often, or, them calling you out to do work, unannounced, whether that's simply straight into work, and I'm looking for clarification on that at the moment. But on site, certainly, where there is, you might be working as a subcontractor or even a subcontractor, it's unlikely the sites themselves will begin to open until the first couple of weeks of June, although I do know that even behind the scenes, a lot of these sites have been and are being currently prepared for the return. So you'll probably find that phase 0 has actually been done in many of the sites already. So I know that's not a clear answer. If you're looking for give me a date when we'll be able to physically put our people back on sites or back in people's homes, it's not confirmed what that date will be, if you're following the government guidance. But I would say you're certainly in a position from next week to begin to make those more clear plans for a return to physical work in the next couple of weeks. And it might be, and it certainly probably will be the case, that in the smaller sites and domestic work, that the physical work will begin to happen in the first few weeks of June in any event, because you don't have the same restrictions in terms of access to sites, travel, etc. So that's probably likely to begin at a more quicker pace, I would suggest. Hopefully that answers your question, Alan.
Alan.
What I'm finding is we've got customers that are ready for us. We've got customers that are ready for us to go into their houses that are empty at the moment. I had one customer earlier this week that says our kitchen is being fitted on the 8th of June in an empty house that has been empty for 4 or 5 months now. We were supposed to be starting that on the 25th of March, and obviously that didn't happen. It's a full rewire in a 4-bedroom house that is an empty house that we were supposed to be going into. Is it possible for us to do that?
Yeah, I think what I would be saying to you is that the phase 0 is that kind of planning to return to work. So the empty house, for example, is probably your planning is weeks of planning. It's a day or so of planning. Looking at what the site looks like, putting in place any measures that's necessary for your staff.
Prior to lockdown, anyway, we were travelling one guy to a van when it.
Sorry, Alan,
When we come phase 1 already, you're saying we're supposed to start. Sorry?
Is everybody hearing okay? Yeah?
I'm losing bits and bobs of that.
I didn't hear much, I'm afraid, Sandra, sorry.
Alan, would you maybe repeat that last part?
Sorry. Obviously, we are at the stage, we're talking about phase 1, 0 and 1 starting next Thursday. We are going to be completed at that stage. So at what point would it be realistic for us to think that we could start actually putting men on the ground and working?
Okay, I'll try and answer that to the best I can. So yes, the planning phase, I think it's probably fair to say that a lot of this work is related to sites. I think that's probably principally what they had in mind, as a site, and that's done on the basis of numbers returning to work. My view would be that you, from the end of next week, the 28th of May, when the First Minister said that work could begin to happen again in the phase process, my thought is that you would use that in the process of planning that return to work, making sure that you have maybe areas marked off if that's necessary or required, particularly in the void property, getting your customers to understand how you would work in their property, with social distancing and all the rest of it. And then there's the animation you could show them from the CICV that we put forward. And I think thereafter, Alan, it would probably be appropriate for you to begin to do that work within the criteria that we've talked about before, maintaining the distancing, making sure tools are cleaned, etc. And the CICV guide that's available online, would be the kind of byword for using that work both for your operatives and for your customers. So if that answers your question in that particular scenario, I would say that you're in an appropriate way when properly briefed and planned, and your staff know what their obligations are, and the customer knows what their requirements are to move forward to start work in that domestic environment.
Okay, is that okay, Alan? Yeah, great. Okay, thanks for that. So that really was the last question today. Thanks, Alan. The last question today, although I noticed, Colin, you had asked for a couple of things on the chat facility. So information on the vehicle charging courses and more information about an existing employee being sent on the adult apprentice course. So we've taken a note of that, Colin, and we'll get information sent to you.
Okay, thank you.
Okay. Bob?
I was just going to mention on the electric vehicle front, members will be aware that there used to be covered in a subject in our toolbox talks this year, which were unfortunately cancelled. Well, Mark McLaughlin, our technical advisor, has completed the presentation, and his next task is going to work on this with the guy that does our video presentations, and that will be something that will be made available on the Select website at some stage, I presume, in the near future. Possibly, well, I better not put a date on it, but it will be available. There'll be a toolbox talk which will go through electric vehicle charging equipment and Amendment 1 in detail soon, possibly by, autumn time. I would think that'll be complete by. Just to give you that heads up.
Okay, thanks very much, Bob. Okay, so that was the last questions that we had. Does anybody else have any other questions that they would like to put to us before we close the meeting? No? Okay, well, thank you very much for attending this morning. It's been a great session, lots of good information, and I hope you all found it very useful and informative, and please do join us again at a future one. Thank you very much.
Thank you.
Thanks, everyone.
See you later. Bye.